Welcome. Okay, today we're going to be going through Excel functions and Excel tables. So there's your 10 skills this week. So skill number 1, today now and count functions. You can see as we're going through. Skill number 2, we're going to look at the if statement. Skill number 3, we're going to look how to move functions, add borders, rotate text. You can read through all of this stuff. What you need to do is go to Fanshawe Online, and from Fanshawe Online download the file exl04_garden. Put this on hold until you have that open, and once you get back we will get started. Alright, so assuming you have the file open and are going to follow along as we go through this, you can see that this workbook has 3 worksheets. The fourth one is the topics, which isn't really part of the assignment. So we have the inventory worksheet. In this worksheet, what you can see is we're keeping track of all of the donated items for the community garden program. So I think there's about 100 rows of data. Let's see here, 77, so close enough. So 77 rows of data, and we have for each item we have the item, the cost, the plant, the type. Hope I caught that before you caught my sneeze. We have the category that it belongs in, quantity and stock, and we're going to calculate a reorder and whether or not we should check our supplier using the if statement in a little bit of time. Okay, the donation sheet keeps track of all the donations we've received, so donated hand tools, donated plants, and the cost shows the cost of each item and our total cost. So there's cost of shovels, cost of rakes, and so on. Okay, so let's get started. So we're going to start on the inventory sheet. You're going to click in cell E4, and in here we're going to enter the today function. So we did that last week when we were calculating your age. So the today function is equals today bracket bracket, and what that will do is go out to your system clock, find the current date, and display that in the cell. So tomorrow when you bring this worksheet up, it would show tomorrow's date and so on. Okay, and there are other components in the assignment in the textbook that we're not going to necessarily follow along, and this says to repeat this in the donations worksheet and in the cost worksheet and so on. So well, let's just kind of go through here. So in here I'm going to put today's date again. Now rather than doing it through the just typing the function, I'll go to the formulas, and there's date and time, and so you can see in here there's the today function. So that inserts the function. So you can do it either way. If we go down here, we're going to put in the now function. So again, date and time, the now function, and you can see with the now function what you get is not only the date but also the time. Later in the course we'll show you how to create your own functions, so you can have time, date, seconds, pretty much anything that you want to do you can create yourself. Okay, so go to the cost sheet. We're on the cost worksheet, and we're going to use, so here we want the number of months. So you can see we've got however many that is, from 5 to 24. What we're going to do here is we're going to use a function called the count function. And what the count function will do is it's going to count all the cells in a range that have a number in them. So if the cell is blank or has text in it, it won't be counted. It will only count cells with a number in it. There's another function called count A, which does basically the same thing, but it only counts cells that have an alphanumeric or a number in them. So whereas the count function only counts numbers, the count A function will count every cell that has something in it. If the cell is blank, it will not be counted. So we're going to use the count function, and we're going to count this column here from 5 to 24. So now remember, the point here is that I can use the count function on this range of cells, because even though you can see text in those cells, January and February, March, and so on, remember, a date is actually stored internally as a number of days since January the 1st, 1900. So even though the cell A5 shows January 2014, that is simply a format. So the underlying value is the number of days, which is a number, but it has been formatted as a date to display as you have it here. So I can use the count function here to count all these cells up. So I'm going to go down to the number of months value. I'm going to go to more functions, statistical, and that's where I'm going to find the count function. So there it is there. There's count A. You can see there are other ones, count blank, which will count the number of cells in a range that are blank, and count if, and so on, which we're going to get onto later in the course. So I'm going to click on the count function. And so in the function dialog box that you can see here, and what the insert function dialog box does is it allows you to have a visual representation to enter the arguments inside a function. So what I want to add in here is, so value 1 would be the first range of cells that I want to see, value 2 would be a second range of cells, and so on. And you can see down here where it says value 1, value 2 are 1 to 255 arguments that contain or refer to a variety of different types of data, but only numbers are counted. Okay, so I'm going to highlight the range. Right? So the nice thing about using the insert function dialog box is that it helps to interpret the range. And you can see here at the top it tells me the range of cells and it shows you what's in those cells, and halfway down just above the text you can see it says equals 20. So it's evaluated that range of cells and told me that there are 20. So this is just a visual clue when you're entering a function to make sure that you're entering something that is valid. If you try to enter something that is not valid, you're going to see an error message in your insert function dialog box, which will twig you to the fact that you've made a mistake. So I'm going to hit enter or click OK here, and it will put in my value of 20. I could do the same thing here. I'll use the count A function here just to give you the other version. I'm just going to type it in this time, equals count A, and I'll highlight the range of cells, and I will hit enter, and you can see it gives me the value of 13 because count A counts a cell that has anything in it, whether it has a number or a value. Okay, so now we're going to go to the inventory sheet. Now here what I want is the number of items, and I want it to display here. So a function does not have to be underneath the data that you're showing. It can be anywhere you want it to be. Okay, so I'm going to count up the number of items that we have in stock. So if I was to count up this column here, then I would have to use count A because this is alphanumeric data. I could also just count here. Now the trouble with this is, and this is one thing you always have to remember when you're inserting a function in Excel, you have to look not just at the data that's displayed, but any possible potential data that could come along down the road. So I would probably, if I was doing this in real life, I would count the names and not the costs, because you may have an item in here that for whatever reason hasn't been costed yet. You still want it to be included in the list of the number of items that you have. Just because it doesn't have a cost doesn't mean that it might not down in the future. So I'm going to use the count A function. And again, I'm going to type it in. I want to show you as you're typing in a function, and as you can see below where I'm typing it in, as I'm typing into a function, Excel is trying to anticipate what I'm doing. So it's doing an autofill for me. So COU I've typed so far, and you can see that it says, well, that could be the count function, the count A, the count blank, and so on. So I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to click to count A, and then I have two choices there, count A or decount A, which is a database function, which we're not going to worry about. And I'm going to say, yes, I want count A, so I'm going to type in my first bracket, and then I'm going to select my range. My mistake here, I'm in the wrong spot. I actually want to be here. So here I'm going to do it. So again, count A. Now, when you're selecting a range of cells, one way you can do it, of course, is just click and drag. But in this case, I've got 70 some odd rows, so it's going to take a minute to scroll down to do that. One option that you have when you're trying to select a range of cells is there's a keyboard shortcut, which is Control plus Shift plus the down arrow, or if you're at the bottom, Control plus Shift plus and the up arrow, which will select a whole range from the top to the next available till where it breaks, basically. So in this case, it will highlight all the cells down to the first blank line. So I'm going to do Control Shift down arrow, and you can see it goes all the way down to the bottom. If that wasn't correct, I could hold my shift key and use my arrow keys to change that range, but in this case it is correct. And again, I'm going to finish by hitting the enter button. Now normally what I would have to do is close that function with a bracket, but by hitting enter, it's just a shortcut. Excel knows that you probably want to put the bracket in, so it'll insert it for you. So I put that in, I scroll up here, and you can see that there are 69 items. Okay, so that's skill number one. Skill number two, we're now going to take a look at the if function. And the if function is a very, very important function in Excel, and it's probably the most difficult function that we've worked with so far. What the if function allows us to do is to test a value and then make a decision. So the example I use most often is I say, if you make these if functions decisions all the time. All day long you're making if statements, or you're doing an if statement logical sort of a test. You're looking outside, and if it's raining, you're going to bring an umbrella. If it's cloudy, you're going to bring an umbrella. If it's sunny, you're not going to bring an umbrella. So you've already made an if statement. You said if rain, then bring an umbrella, otherwise don't bring an umbrella, which is the components of an if function. So let me show you here. So basically what we want to do here in this section here on reorder, we want to test how many we have in stock. And if we have less than, if we have less than 10 in stock, I want to put the words in here, order. And if there's 10 or more, I'm going to put in the words level OK. All right. So basically what I'm doing is I'm going to say if E9 is less than 10, then I want the word order to display in this cell, and if it's greater than or equal to 10, I want the word level OK. So to do that, I'm going to use an if function, and I'm going to use the insert function dialog box. So I'm going to go up here to logical, and there's the if function. So the if function, so before we've looked at the sum function, the average, the max, the min function, today, then the now function. All of those functions, the today and the now function had no arguments, and the average and so on, and the sum function, you could have up to 255 arguments. The if function, as you can see here, allows you to have only 3 arguments. The first argument is the logical test, and the logical test is where I am making a decision. So my decision here is if E9, whatever the quantity is in cell E9, is less than 10, so that's my logical test. And if that logical test comes back to be true, then whatever is in the next box down, value if true, will display in that cell. And if the logical test is false, then whatever is in the value if false box is going to display. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to say if E9 is less than 10, and you can see immediately as soon as I type that in, I get equals false that shows in my dialog box. So it's tested it, and I know it's right. Now, let me show you what would happen if I put something in here that was incorrect. So in that situation, the E9 less than 10 is not a valid statement, so I get the words invalid. So this is how the function dialog box helps you when you're creating a function to make sure that you're putting something in correctly. So I'm going to go back to here, I'm going to change that to less than, and if it's true, if it is less than 10, I want to say reorder. Now notice when I'm using the insert function dialog box, I'm not putting quotes around my text, but watch what happens when I hit tab to move to the next box. The box automatically puts the quotes in for me. Why that's important is that if you're typing the function in instead of using the dialog box, you must put double quotes around your text. And if it's not, and if E9 is not less than 10, and otherwise 10 or greater, I want to put in the words level OK. All right, so that is my if statement. So let me just kind of review that. So here it is up here. If E9 is less than 10, reorder, level OK. So reorder if value if true, and level OK is value if false. Now remember, an if statement can go either way. I could have done exactly the same thing by saying if E9 is greater than or equal to 10, then I would simply have to reverse the value of true and value of false. So if E9 is greater than or equal to 10, then level OK, otherwise reorder. So let's just go through this again. So I'm going to bring up the dialog box. So the very first thing of an if statement is your logical test. So the logical test is made up of three things. It's made up what you're testing it against, and in between that are your comparison operators. So your comparison operators are less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, not equal to, which is two chevrons, like a less than and a greater than, and equal to, which is just the equal sign. So your logical test should always have those three components: what you're testing, your comparison operator, and what you're comparing it to. Then value of true is whatever, if that evaluates to true, whatever you want to display, and value of false is whatever you want to display. Now in this case we're displaying a number, but I could also have done a value. I could said if I was doing things like looking at performance reviews. And if their performance review is 3 or greater, they're going to get a 10% raise. And if it's less than 3, they're going to get a 5% raise. And then I would simply say if the performance review cell is greater than or equal to 3, then the value of true would be 10% or 0.10. And value of false would be 5% or 0.05. Okay, so I'm going to say OK. Now the other thing to remember when you're creating a function is you're only creating it for that very first row. So in this case, F10, I'm only checking for row 9. Or sorry, F9, I'm only checking for row 9. So I'm only testing for that one thing, because now I'm going to use my fill handle to copy that down. And by using the fill handle, it will automatically change E9 to be E10, E11, and so on and so forth. Now I could grab the fill handle, drag it down, or another shortcut, if you double click on the fill handle, it will carry your formula right down to the very bottom. Okay, so it's just a shortcut to allow you to do it. Either one works, so if you just grab the fill handle, drag it down, that'll work too. So check supplier, what we want to do in here is we want to test the value of the item, so where it says cost each, which is cell B9, and if that's $25 or more, then the municipality has a policy that says if a value is worth $25 or more, then you have to put that item out for bid. So we're going to test to say if E9 is greater than or equal to 25, then I want the words check supplier to show in the cell. Otherwise I'm going to say supplier OK. All right, so let's do it again. So I'm going to say insert function. There's the if function. And I'm testing here to say if cost each is greater than or equal to $25. Don't put your dollar sign in. You can put decimal points in if you want, but just greater than or equal to 25. If that's true, I want the words check supplier. And if it's false, in other words, if the cost is less than $25, I'm going to say supplier OK. All right, and again, I'm going to double click the fill handle to carry that down. So you can see here that in this particular item, line 14, the cost is $72, so we want to check the supplier because it's more than 25, and the quantity in stock is 7, so we want to reorder more of that stock. Now, every time you change a value in a spreadsheet, it will reevaluate any functions that are dependent on that cell. So if for whatever reason I change the quantity in stock here to 17, then it will change it from reorder to level OK. That's how Excel works. Anytime you change a value in the spreadsheet, and last week, remember when we inserted a new row and it had to move that whatever was in the current row out of the way to make room, it automatically went through and changed every function in the spreadsheet that referenced that cell. The same basic tenet is happening here. Okay? All right, so that was skill number 2. We're going to move on to skill number 3, which is move, add borders, and rotate text. So what we want to do here is I'm going to take this information here, so cells A5 to B6, and I want to move them over here underneath cell the date. One of the important things that I want to recognize here, take a look at this cell. So I've got count A, A9 to A20 or A77. So I am counting all the values from this range down here. Now remember, we said if you use the fill handle, relative addressing is going to change that. So right now I'm in B. If I was to move that over to E, that's an increase of 1, 2, 3 columns. So it would change my A's to be D's. Okay, but move doesn't work the same way. So again, I'm going to highlight the range of cells. I'm going to put my cursor on the border, which is the same as doing a cut and a paste. And I'm going to click and I'm going to drag that over here. So what happened here was, because I used a move command, it did not, relative addressing didn't come into play, it did not change my values. So that's the same as doing a cut and paste as opposed to a copy and paste. Copy and paste or the fill handle will change the formulas, cut or move will not. Okay? So then there's a whole bunch of stuff in here for borders, but I'm simply going to do it very simply here. I'm going to do some borders in here. What I want to do here is I'm going to select this cell here from B4, and I'm going to type in the word statistics. And then I'm going to select B4 to C6, and I'm going to do a merge and center. So remember, this is a merge and center up here. So we have in cell A1 we had the word Aspen Falls, then we did a merge and center. Well, we didn't, but it was already done. This merged cell A1 up to and including H1. We're going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to select from B4 to C6. I'm going to go to the Home tab and I'm going to click on Merge and Center. So what that does is it merges B4, C4, B5, C5, B6, and C6 into one cell now called B4. And then in here I can center that text. I can change the angle of the text, which is this one here called orientation. So I could say angle counterclockwise. I can also, whoops, oh, I didn't want wrap text. I want this one here. I can also go down here to format cell alignment, which is going to bring up a dialog box. And here I could actually change. So you can see that right now it's at a 45-degree angle. I could drag it down here. It'd be a negative 45-degree angle, and so on. I also have options in here for center, how you want to have the text in the cell. So centered, left center across selection, and vertical alignment. And then if I wanted to have an indent, I could have an indent here, text control, and so on. Okay. So then I want to copy the format color from this cell over to here. So, well, before I do that, I'm going to change the style. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to pick a cell style that matches the ones that are here, which is probably this one here. Yep. And then I'm going to add a border. So the thing about borders is I want to have like a big border all the way around. So I'm going to go up on the Home tab and I'm going to click on the border dialog or the drop down. So here you can see I have a number of different border types. So this is a bottom border and a top border, left border, right border, no borders, all borders, and so on. So I'm going to click on thick outside border, which is going to put a big black border all the way around the outside of that cell. Understand that borders are cumulative. So I could put multiple types of borders. So now that I've got that selected, I can select this section here, and I can maybe say I want a right border. And that's going to put a small line between those two. All right. I could change the border's color and so on. If I click on the border option and go down to the very bottom, you can see I have more borders, which is going to bring up the border dialog box. And from here I could decide what kind of border that I want. I can pick the color of the border. So I could say I want, well, let's just go, I'm going to do some stuff here. So I'm going to go here and now again I can go here, I can click on the borders dialog and click more borders. I could click the launch, the dialog launcher at the bottom of the font box, which is going to bring up my boxes. So there's border there. I could right click and from the dialog box I can go to format cells. Doesn't matter which one I pick, I'm going to have my options. So here, let's say I'm going to pick something. I'm going to put it this border. I'm going to make it this color. Let's make it a pronounced color. Let's go with a dark orange. And then I can pick where I want the borders to be. So I could say I want a top border, I want a bottom border, I want a left border, I want a right border. I could put a border in the middle. Okay, all of those options are available to me. Or I could, and again I can do this sort of thing too. I can click on here, right? You can have all kinds of options. I can turn them off again by clicking on each one to turn it off. Well, just in the wrong spot. All right, I can do it from here as well. Oops. All right, where's the bottom one? Oh, right there. Okay, so anyway, you can do all of those different things here from the border options. Okay, so there's your colors and what have you. So I can also go here in the borders drop down, and I can do things like line style. So there I can pick the style, and you can see that my cursor changes to a pencil. But before I do that, I'm going to change the color. Okay, and now as I draw my border, I'm going to get the border that I selected. All right, I can turn off the pencil by hitting the escape button. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that out of there. Okay, so that's basically borders. That's close enough for what we wanted to do. Okay, so skill number 4 is talking about conditional formatting. And we will actually spend, depending on which course you're in, so in Comp1390, this is your last kick at the can in Excel, so you don't have to worry about futures. And at Comp6037, we're going to be going much more deeply into Excel, and conditional formats will play a big role as we move forward within Excel. All right, so what a conditional format simply means is that exactly what it sounds like. It applies a format based on a condition, and those conditions are called a rule. So basically what you'll have to do is you select a range of cells, and then you tell it what rule you would want. So you could say show, in this case here, if I look at my reorder column, I'm going to say show every cell that has the word reorder in it in red with dark red text. In the supplier column, I could select that column and say show every cell that has check supplier in it in a yellow background with dark blue text if I want to. You can do whatever you want. Okay. So we're going to select here. So remember to select the whole range. I'm going to click the first one, Shift Control down arrow to select the whole range. All right, so they're all selected, and I'm going to go up here to conditional formatting. I can do this from the quick analysis lens, so there it is there. But again, the quick analysis lens doesn't work on so there's formatting, and so then I could say there's my conditional formatting options. You can see at the bottom it says conditional formatting uses rules to highlight interesting data. But I'm simply going to go back to doing it the old-fashioned way. Control, because on a Mac you don't have the quick analysis lens, and I just find it's more, you have more options when you go to the detail. So from conditional formatting, I have some options here. So there's highlight cell rules, and basically it's exactly what it sounds like. Highlight a cell based on a rule. So I could say highlight everything that's greater than a certain number, or less than a certain number, or between two numbers, or equal to a number. In this case, I'm going to use text that contains, because I want anything that has the words reorder in it to display. And then I can go down to more rules, and there's all sorts of things where you can create the rule directly. But for this course, or for this lesson, we're just going to stick with this. We're going to say text that contains. I'm going to type in reorder. And then I have 6 presets. So light red fill, yellow fill, green fill, and with text, just the fill, red text, red border, or I can do the custom and I can create any format that I want. So we'll just stick with the first one here, light red fill with dark red text. I'll click OK. All right. And again, this is conditional formatting is exactly the same as everything else. If I click on cell A14 and I change that value to 17, the conditional formatting will go away because the cell no longer matches the rule. I'm going to change it back to a 7, and you can see this shows back up again. So I'm going to do the same thing for the check supplier. So I'm going to select, Shift Control down arrow. I'm going to go to conditional formatting, highlight cell rules, text that contains, and I don't have to type in all check supplier, but I can't just type in supplier because if I did, I'd get everything. So I could just type check, or if you want to be sure, I can type supplier. Just remember that when you're working with My IT Lab, if it tells you to check for check supplier, type the whole thing in because that's what it'll be looking for when it marks it. So even though you will get the right result, if you just typed in the word check, it'll mark it incorrect if you're not careful. And I'm going to change that to, let's say, yellow fill. Okay, so now another version of conditional formatting. So if I click on conditional formatting, we've looked at this one. Top and bottom rules does basically the same thing, but as you can see on the pop-up there, it says top 10 items, top 10%, bottom 10 items, bottom 10%, above average or below average. And even though it says top 10 items or top 10%, if we click on that, you actually have the option of changing it from 10% to 5% or whatever. Now in this case it wouldn't matter because we're not dealing with numbers, but that's what that option is for. Data bars, color scales, and icon sets are all basically the same thing. What they'll do is they'll display kind of a small chart inside your values. So what we're going to do here is we're going to select E9 to E77. So we're going to go back up to the top. So I'm going to select E9, Shift Control down arrow to select that whole range. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use a data bar. So the data bars are here. So you can see as I hover over top of them. And remember, when you're working with data bars, there's gradient fills, the top, or solid fills. You have to make sure when you're using My IT Lab that you put the right one in. So this one is a gradient blue, this one is a solid blue. Okay, so just be careful. And this is one of the problems with the quick analysis lens. You do not get the choice of which data bar you want. It's simply automatically going to pick solid blue. All right. So in our case, we're going to select, we're just going to go with the default, so we'll go with with this one here. So let me explain what a data bar does. If you look in your cells there, so if I look at D9 or E9, you can see that I've got a bar that kind of goes halfway across. In B10, I have a bar that just goes a little bit less. In B12, I have one that goes almost all the way across. I'm just going to select this so that I can show you in the data. If I go down here, so if I look at this cell in B29, it goes to almost across. If I go all the way down to the very last cell, 144, you can see it completes the whole cell. So what a data bar does is it takes a look at each value in the cell and compares it to all of the cells in the range. And then it will create a bar that's dependent on how that one cell compares to the largest cell in the range. Now later in the course we can show you how to change the ranges. By default it will simply take the largest number, in this case 144, and say that's 100%. And then every other cell that it looks at, so you can see this 9 up here in E71 is very small because 9 as a percentage of 144 is smaller. Okay, so that's the way data bars work. Now the other options that you have in there, let's go to cost each here. Yeah, in the textbook they do a bunch of other stuff here, but what I'm going to do here, I'm going to use the same column, because one of the things about conditional formatting is conditional formatting, you can have multiple values in a particular cell. All right, so we're going to look here and yeah, all right, so let's do that. We're going to change the color of the quantity in stock depending on the value of the cell. So I'm going to select the range, right, Shift Control down arrow, and I'm going to go to conditional formatting, and I'm going to say highlight cell rules. I want anything that is greater than let's say 75. So if it's greater than 75, I want it to show in green. And I'm going to leave it highlighted. I'm going to go back to cell rules, and if it's less than 25, I want it to show in red. And the rest of it we're going to say, so what I said, if it's between 26 and what I say, 75, I want it to show in yellow. Okay, so what this has given us here, so now I have actually 4 conditional formats on these cells. I have my data bar, I have less than or between 26 and 75 in yellow, I have less than 25 in red, and I have greater than 75 in green. All right? So what this is trying to do is it gives you a visual clue when you're looking at large amounts of data. So as an example, I used to do work for the Heart and Stroke Foundation because my wife ran the door-to-door campaign. And we used to have to send out letters to all of our contributors who generated more than, let's say, $200 in donations would get a letter. Rather than having to go just manually read through the list and try and find all the ones that had 200, I could do a conditional format that simply said 200. And then it would automatically check the range and it would put up anyone that was greater than 200 in a particular color. Again, I used to work at Labatt's, and what we would have to do is look at market share, and market share is key in a brewing company. So we would want market share that is over a certain percent to show in green and below a certain percent to show in red, so that we would know exactly where to focus our energy when we're working through that. So that's what conditional formatting allows us to do. It's very, very powerful when we're trying to work through that. Okay, so that was skill number 4. I'm going to move on to skill number 5 because I'm probably taking a fair amount of time on this particular instruction. I'm going to go down to the donations worksheet. And on this worksheet, what I'll have here is you can see that in this range of cells, I have what has been donated. So I'm just going to work on this one here. So I've got the items. So trowels in the first quarter, there were 58 donated, and 60, and then 75, and then 85. So you can see that that's kind of my donation rate is increasing on that one. Let's find the one that's falling off. No, they all seem to be going pretty good. Anyway, well, here's one here. So on bulb planters, I went from 77 to 81, down to 45, up to 96. So what we're going to look at now are something called spark lines. And what spark lines are is basically just a very small chart that keeps track of ranges of cells. All right. So let's show you here. So I'm going to select this range of cells. And I'll show you quickly first from the quick analysis lens. When I go in the quick analysis lens, there's spark lines. You can see that there's different types. There's line, column, and win-loss. So as I hover over it, there's what a line chart would look like, there's what a column chart would look like, and there's what a win-loss, which is meaningless in this situation. So what happens when you use the quick analysis lens, whatever range of cells you have highlighted, it'll simply put the spark lines to the right. Now the trouble with that is that if I had a column in here that said total, it would put the spark lines right over top of the totals. So I'm not going to use that. I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way. And there's 2 ways to do it. I'm going to click on Insert. And on the Insert box, I have spark lines here. So there's line, column, and win-loss. So in this particular case, I have the data selected. And I want the spark lines to go here. So I'm going to select the data. I'm going to go to Insert Spark Lines, and it's going to say, well, choose the data that you want. So there's my data range, and where do I want the results? I want them to be here. The value of doing it this way is that if I did have totals in column F, I could put my spark lines over here in column G. All right, so I'm going to click OK. Now I'll do the same thing for this range of cells, but I'll do it in reverse. So I'm going to select the range first. There I want the spark lines, and I go to Insert, Spark Lines. And it knows there's not currently anything in that range of cells, so it's assuming that's where I want the results. So now it's saying where's the data. So I'm going to put the data in here and click OK. Once I've got the spark lines in, notice that I get a brand new menu here called Sparkline Tools, and in here I've got line. I could change it to column. In this showed box, I could say show me where my high points are, show me where my low points are. Negative points, I can first and last point, and markers. I can change the style of the line, so a different style. I can change the color. I can change the marker color, which is the little dot that shows up based on high point, low point, and so on, and what have you. Okay, so in effect, that is spark lines. Skill number 6 is the find and replace. So I'm going to go back to the inventory sheet. So what I want to do here, and in your textbook it'll say use find and replace to look for earth cover and replace it with the word herb. So if I was to go down through this list, in the category section, I can look for what is it saying? Earth cover, wherever the heck it is. I'm sure they're in here, but anyway, that's the problem with doing these things manually, is trying to find it. So what I'm going to use is I'm going to use the find and replace. So on the home tab, on the far right, you'll see find and select. When I click on that, I can say find or replace. So I'm going to click on replace. By the way, I could do this again with a control H. Let's see here. Control F is find. Oh, control F, and then I can click on replace. So I'm going to look for earth cover. And I'm going to replace it with herb. So notice on the bottom I've got options. I could say replace all, which would simply go through and replace them all. I could say replace, which would replace the very next one. I could say find all, which finds them. And I can say find next, which finds the next available one. I'm going to click on find all, and then you can see in the list below that it says, well, there's one in column 12. There's another one in here, and notice they're an absolute reference and dollar signs. So I could just go through this list and pick individual ones that if I wanted to do it. The reason I'm showing you this is that when you're using find and replace, it's important that you kind of make darn sure what you're looking for is what you want to replace. As an example, if I said replace the with a, it would not only replace THE, but it would also replace they, their, them, etc., etc., etc. So you've got to make sure that when you're doing a find and replace that you're getting what you want it to do. Okay, and if it's correct, I can say replace all, and it'll go through and it'll tell me how many it made. I can click OK. The box will stay open until you close it. So I'm going to close the box. All right, and that's pretty much it for find and replace. Skill number 7 is freeze panes. And freeze panes is helpful. Like in this particular case, we've got something like 77 rows. So the trouble with this is that I'm down at the bottom here and I'm starting to enter information down here. If I can't remember what is in column B, I don't know that that's cost each for whatever reason, I have to scroll back up to see the heading. Okay, and over here I've got a number that says 144. What's that number mean? So it's not too bad when you've got a very small spreadsheet like this, but if you've got something like payroll where you can have numerous different types of numbers, you could have the hours of work, the overtime hours, the shift allowance, the whatever, lots and lots of different numbers. It can be very difficult as you're scrolling through to make sure that you're on exactly the right cells. To make that easier, there's something called freeze panes. And what freeze panes does is it freezes your headings on the screen so that when you scroll down, your headings will remain on the screen. Now, click on the Review tab, and you can, the View tab, and you can see an option here called Freeze Panes. You can see when I click on it, I've got 3 options: Freeze Panes, Freeze the top row, and Freeze the first column. Now, freeze the top row will freeze whatever happens to be the top row on your screen. The problem with using that, let me show you. So I would want to freeze row 8 so that my headings stay on the screen. So I scroll it up so that 8 is the top row on my screen. All right, so now I'm going to go to Freeze Panes and I'm going to say freeze the top row. My problem with this is that I cannot get back up to the cells above that. Rows 1 through 7 are basically locked out for me. I could get there by going up here and typing A1. Well, even that doesn't work, so I can't even get there from that way. So the only way to get there would be to go back to Freeze Panes and unfreeze so that I can scroll back up. However, if I do it another way, understand when you click on Freeze Panes, whatever cell you currently happen to be in, it will freeze above that and to the left. So in this case, if I want to freeze just row 8, I have to be in cell A9, right? Because if it freezes above and to the left, well, there is no columns to the left, so it's simply going to freeze rows 1 to 8. So I'm going to click here and say freeze panes. So now as I scroll down, my headings remain on the screen, but I can also get back up into my cells above that. I'm going to do an unfreeze. So let's say that I had information scrolling off the right hand page, so I actually want to keep my type of plant as well. So I'm going to go to cell B9 and it freezes above and to the left. So when I'm in row 9, it will freeze row 8. When I'm in column B, it will freeze column A. So then I can go again up here to freeze panes, and now you can see this solid line that shows up on the screen. That shows me where it's frozen. So as I scroll down, my headings are there, and I scroll across, it freezes my headings here. It has no impact on the data itself. It's just there to help you, give you a visual clue when you're working on your spreadsheet. I'll unfreeze the panes, and then I'm back to where I was before. So that's skill number 7. Skill number 8. Oh, and the other thing they talk about in skill number 7 is they want to duplicate a worksheet. So it's very common when you're working with an Excel that you might have, let's say I've got a whole bunch of information here, and then I want to have a separate worksheet that's got all of my inventory information in it, but for whatever reason I've got different formats on it or what have you. So I want to copy my inventory worksheet to have a different version of it over here. I'll give it a different name so I can keep track of it. There's a couple of ways to do that. I can right click on the inventory worksheet, I can say move or copy, and I can put a checkbox and create a copy, and then I can tell it where I want it to be. I'm going to say move to end. And now I have a duplicate of my inventory worksheet. So by doing this, what it allows me to do is leave my original data alone, and then I can play all I want in the inventory number 2 worksheet, which I'm going to call, I'll just call it Bob. So on Bob, I can do whatever I want because I know that my original data is still valid in the inventory worksheet over here. But on Bob, I could go in and change names or add columns or delete things or change formats or whatever, and my original data will stay the same. Okay. So we'll work on the Bob sheet here. So in skill number 8, what we're going to do is we're going to create something called a table. And a table is a unique construct in Excel that allows you to do analysis on large quantities of data. So you're always going to, a table is usually, as you see in this particular spreadsheet, this is a really great example of a table because we have rows and rows of information all about similar sorts of data. And I want to be able to take a look at different things and so on. So let's just get started. To create a table, all you have to do is click somewhere in the table, in the data that you want to make the table, and then I'm going to go to my Home tab. Sorry, let me show you first. On the Insert tab, there is an option here called Insert Table. So I could simply click there and it will insert my table, and then as a second step I would format that table. I can do both of 2 steps in one from the Home tab because here there's an option called Format as Table. So I'm simply going to click Format as Table, and I'm going to pick a style. So the first thing that a table will do is it will apply a certain visual representation to your data to make it easier to stand out. So I'll just pick something here. I'll pick medium 4. When I do that, now the trick here with the table is you've got 2 ways to do it. You can select the whole table and then click on Format as Table, or you can select a single item, and if it's data that has barriers, so in this particular case I selected cell A9, and because above that were my labels to tell me what the columns mean, and because in column H is blank, so the table will go from A to H because there is no data to the right of supplier, and it will go down to the bottom, and it will look at to the blank row at the bottom, and it will automatically select that table. Just remember, when you're working with my IT lab, in your Format as Table dialog box that displays, it shows you the range of cells. So you can see here it says equals $A, $8 to $G, $77, and my table has headings. So we want that, so I'm going to click OK. So you can see immediately what it does is it applies that format. So I had picked dark 4, or dark blue table style medium 4. If I don't particularly like the way it looks, I can change the style to something that's maybe not quite so dramatic. Let's just go up to something like this. Okay, all right. So a couple of things you do. So one of the things, the only ways you know that you're in a table, one of the visual clues is you get these little arrows beside each column heading. Those are called filters. But you also get a brand new table menu called Table Tools. And on the far left, you've got the name of the table. So by default, it will name the table Table 1. But I can change that name. Let's just call it Bob, because I'm on the Bob worksheet. All right. So that table now has the name Bob. And then I have a whole bunch of other options here, which we'll come back to in a bit. Okay. One of the beautiful things about tables is that these filter buttons allow you to do a number of different things. I can sort the data. So let's say I want to look at what's my most expensive item. I could say show me the table from largest to smallest. And it will automatically sort the whole table by the largest number to the smallest number. I could say show me the ones that I have the most amount of stock in. So I could say largest to smallest. And you can see that there's my largest number, and then it goes down to my smallest. Understand that when you're using the filter buttons, you can only sort on one field. So I couldn't sort by saying show me all my type plant by cost. I could sort by plant to have all the plants together, or I could sort by cost to have all the costs, but I could not say show me the cost from the cheapest to the highest in each category. To do that, I have to create a custom sort, and I'll do that later on to show you how to do that. You can also do things like sort by color. So I could go into, let's go to reorder here, and I could say sort by color and put all the red ones at the top. I could go here to sort by supplier, by color, and I could put all the yellow ones at the top. Okay. So again, and if you look in the little arrow beside the heading, you'll see a little arrow there to show you that this is how the table is currently sorted. All right. Okay. So the other thing you can do with a table is something called calculated columns. So with this table, I'm going to create a brand new column here. So I'm going to click over here in H8, and I'm going to type something called total cost. Notice it automatically expands my table to include that new field. I also get this little arrow down here called autocorrect options. If I didn't want total cost to be part of my table, I could say undo table auto expansion, in which case then that one column would no longer be part of the table. But in this case, I want it to be. One of the nice things about a table is that when you create a formula, it automatically carries that formula through the whole spreadsheet, or through the whole table. So I no longer have to click the fill handle and drag it down. So my total cost, of course, is going to be equals the cost each multiplied by my quantity in stock. Now, the reason they are called calculated columns is that you can see that if I look at my formula either on the worksheet or up here on the formula bar, it actually shows the name of the heading. So it says equals at cost each times at quantity in stock. And there are ways to get rid of the at signs, and we won't worry about that today. So my formula, what a calculated column simply means is that instead of using the cell references, it will automatically use the column headings. Now be very careful when you're working within my IT lab. If it says it wants a calculated column, like I could have typed in there equals B9 times E9, and it would have worked and it would have carried it down. But that wouldn't be a calculated column because it's not using the name of the column. So you have to make sure that if it's asking for a calculated column, just point to the cell. Don't type it in. Okay? And now I've got my total cost. All right. And all right. So another value of using a table is filters. So in here, what I've got is, I'm going to do a couple of things here. So I'm going to filter to only show me, let's see here, box and container and barrel. All right, I'm going to click OK. So now I only show, so that one's barrel, box, container, and so on and so forth, and the category is equipment. So that's probably not a great idea, so I'm going to click that and I'm going to say clear the filter. So now I'm going to say just show me equipment. Alright, so there's all the equipment, so I get handheld, barrel, container, and so on. And then within equipment, I only want to look at container. So I can go in here and say just show me container. So again, the whole value of a filter, and I'll use it in a human resources perspective. If you have payroll data for a whole, let's say you're working for 3M, and so you have payroll data for the head office, you have payroll data for the factory out here on Oxford Street, you have payroll data for other factories that have in Brockville and blah blah blah, and so let's say you've got 10 factories in Canada. So you have a whole whack of data, but you're only wanting to take a look at the human resources department within the London factory. Using a filter, I could say just show me London and then department human resources, and all of the other stuff. Notice on my row headings here that I go from row 8 to 14 to 41 to 42 to 51. That's because when you do a filter, it doesn't delete the data that doesn't apply, it simply hides it. So you can see it goes from 8 to 14, which means that rows 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13 are not part of the filter. The data is still there, but they're not displaying. Okay, so the other nice thing about a table, I'm going to clear my filters. I can do that up here from the data tab. I can say clear. That'll clear all the filters, or I could have gone in and clicked on clear filter. What I want to do here is I want to show totals. So I want to show how many items, and I want to say look at the total cost or the average cost and whatever. We'll come back to that in a minute. Within a table, I'm going to go to Table Tools Design. In the table style options, I have some options in here. So you can see I've got one thing called header row. If I turn that off, the headers disappear. We turn that back on because I don't know why you would turn them off. Banded rows gives you that different color for each second row. So again, it's just a visual clue to help you read across. First column would bold the first column. Last column will bold the last column. Banded columns, I'll turn off banded rows for a second. Banded columns does the same thing on columns. Just changes the color on every second column. I'm going to turn banded rows back on because that's the most common. Which leaves us with this last one called the total row, which is by far the most important tool within a table. What the total row does is allows you to provide totals of just the visible data. So let me show you. I'm going to turn on the total row, and you can see at the very bottom of my table I get the word total over here in the first column, and I get the total cost in the last column. And that's when you turn on the total row, that's what it'll do by default. It'll put the word total in the left, and as long as the numbers in the last column are numbers, it'll total them. If there weren't numbers there, it would count them. But each one, as I get to each column or each cell, I can click this little arrow beside the cell and I could change it. So I actually want the average total cost. So my average cost is $427 as opposed to my total. I want to know how many items that I have, so I'm going to change the word total here to count. So there are 69 items in my table right now. I could go into here to cost each and say just show me the most important, most expensive one. So my most expensive item is $72.58, and so on. So I can do every column, quantity in stock. I could say show me my minimum number here, so show me my lowest. So my lowest quantity in stock is 7. Now I don't know how valuable that is in this circumstance, but that's what you allow to do with a total row. Notice that if I click on a particular cell and I look up at the formula bar, when I use the total row, it puts in a subtotal function. Now you don't need to understand that. You don't need to worry about it. You're never going to type it in. It automatically does that in a total row. All right, so I'm going to just hit escape to get out of that again. Now the beauty of the total row is that now if I filter, so let me just go back here and filter on equipment. Actually, let's filter on flower and vegetable and vegetation. Now let's go bush. Okay, So there they are. So now there's only 29 of those. So again, you can see on your row numbers, they go from 50 to 55, 57 to 59 to 63, and so on. So all the rows that are hidden are not part of my filter, but the total row only shows the filtered data. And that's the important thing about a total row. And that's what makes it so powerful, because I can put in all sorts of things in here. Just remember, when you're working with my IT lab, you cannot, if it tells you it wants a total row, you must use the total row from the dialog box, or from the table tools menu. You have to turn on the total row. Otherwise, if you typed in some functions, or even if you typed in the subtotal function, it's going to mark it incorrect because it's looking for the total row. And the whole purpose of a total row is the ability to have your totals only deal with the values that are visible on the screen. Okay? All right. Skill number 10 is pretty straightforward. One of the things about a table is that there are some things you can't do on a table. If I go up here on the Home tab, you can see merge and center as an example is turned off on a table. I can't do a merge and center on a table. If I go to the data tab, some of the subtotals I can't do on a table. What else is there? Page layout. Well, page layout will probably work. Review would work, and so on and so forth. So on the Home tab, I can't, as I say, I can't do merge and center. Most of the stuff I can still do on a table. If you, for whatever reason, if you need to work with a command that's not visible because it's a table, you would have to convert it back from a table to regular data. You do that from the Table Tools Design, Convert to Range, and that will change the data back from a table to regular data. The other things in skill number 10 is scale options. So if I was to click on the page break preview here, just give it a second. So I can see on this particular table that some of my data is printing on page 1 and some of it's printing on page 2. I don't want that to happen. I want it to all print on page 1. I'm going to go to page layout. The first thing I would do would be to change it from portrait orientation to landscape. And in a landscape, I still have that one column in column H that's displaying on the second page. So then I'm going to change my width and my height. So width would say I want to have all my width fit on one page. So when I click on that, you can see that my scale drops from 100% to, give it a second, this shouldn't take this long. Wow. This usually is an indication that the table for some reason has taken up the whole spreadsheet all the way to the very bottom, even though it only goes 77 rows. I'll have to double check that because this is crazy. And the trouble is that you can't do anything about it. Click on pause. Well, this thing has just gotten hung up, but rather than stop the whole thing, because I'm like all the way through this whole presentation, so rather than having to start the whole thing over again, I'm just going to talk over top of this because there's only a couple more things that I want to cover off here. So scale to fit allows you to change so that it fits on one page or fits the width on one page or the height on one page. So that's the scale to fit options where it said that I tried to do it got hung up. There it goes there. Okay. So changed it to 10. So it did something really weird here. So I'm going to change that back to automatic, and it's probably going to take just as long to go back to where it was. Um, the other options that you have, okay, there. No, it's going to take forever again. So I'm not sure what the hell's gone on here, but I'm just going to keep talking here. The other options that you have here, hide rows and columns, which is basically the same as we looked at last week, hiding a spreadsheet. To hide a row or a column that you don't want to display, you can simply right-click on the column heading, the letter A, B, C, D, or whatever, and from the drop-down menu select Hide. Or you can pick a particular cell, and then from the Format tab, you can select Hide Column or Hide Row, and it will hide that row. Again, you can change, we can lock down the formatting of the spreadsheet to get rid of that, but we're not going to worry about it. And once this thing comes back, I will show you print titles, because you're going to need that for your grade, for the grader. So just bear with this for a second as it kind of cranks away at whatever the heck it's doing here. This may be a problem because I have Captivate, which is what I'm using to capture my screen, and it may be screwing that up as well somehow. But again, sometimes this happens with Excel, and it just kind of goes off in its own little Excel-y world and gets weird on you. So the last thing is the print titles command and rows to repeat at the top. What that is used for is when you go to print your spreadsheet, if you've got titles across the top. So if I got well, in this case I've got cost each and so on and so forth. If the second page prints on another page, all my titles disappear because they stay on just the first page. So you have an option within the print layout command called print titles, and when you click on print titles, you'll see a box there that says rows to repeat. All you have to do is click in the row that you want to repeat on the titles, and then it will repeat at the top of the page. Okay, so I'm not going to wait for this thing to finish because I've got oh, there we go. I guess I will wait. Let me go back to a different worksheet here. So what I could do here is when I printed that particular worksheet, so if I was to print this right now, these headings would only print on page 1 and not on page 2 and page 3 and so on. To fix that, I'm going to click on print titles, and it sees here it says rows to repeat at the top. I can click there, and then you don't type in row 8, you simply click on it and it'll put in $8 $8. If I wanted to repeat, if I wanted all of my headings, I could click on 1 to 8 and then would say column 1 column 8, but then I would simply click OK. Now if I click on print preview, oh, this is probably going to hang up too. No, there you go. So there's page 1. You can see on page 2 my headings repeat on the top of the page and so on. Okay. All right, so I'm going to stop this now because I don't want to get to a point where I have to repeat this whole thing. Thanks a lot.